to begin. And yeah, my name is Ryan. If you're new, I think most of us are familiar, but happy to have you here. Now we'll go ahead and get my share screen up. Click on this. I was talking with Jeff a little bit at the beginning, just before we got started, how it's kind of exciting to do this. You know, we went through a few different sources. I don't usually say, but myself, I'm an advanced sommelier through the Court of Masters. I've taken the Masters a few times, but yeah, I'm a sommelier. It's kind of funny. Like, no, I'm not a paletologist or, you know, soil scientist, but some of the things that I personally was looking at, coming into up to this class, Jamie Good's Science of Wine, where he breaks down soils in a few different, in one major chapter, but kind of a terrific source of just the nuts and bolts of it all. This is kind of fun. This is by Charles Frankel, Land and Wine, where he walks through France and the development of these soils, and he takes it in chronological order. But he gets into some of the storytelling, so it's not just super dry. Talking about dinosaurs and everything too. I wish I would have cracked into this book a little bit more. I just didn't have the time for it, but we read through a little bit even with the Loire class last Friday, and he does a great job, Rajat Par, going through some of these major wine regions, primarily from France, but a good way of differentiating soil types and how producers might release them through bottlings as well. But I thought it might be interesting for you to see where I maybe gathered some material from, or what I was looking at. This is actually a blue schist. It's a volcanic soil from Sèvre-et-Maine in the western part of Loire. And I looked at that because it's actually the oldest soil in the Land of Wine books, where it goes back about 500 million years. So it's kind of fun how you can taste these wines or see the history behind them, and even the Earth's history, and, what's reflected in them and what's grown on these soils. I had our bartender friend who loved the discussion of soil types, and that was always a big interest for him, where he would collect all these different rocks, and we would do even staff trainings. But one of the things that he had done was trying to give us an idea of the depth of time where these soils have been formed. You know, you start with a string and you pull it out so long, like 6 feet, and then like this is the whole beginning period of all of like Earth's history, and then where we start to come along, you know, get smaller and smaller to our little influence along this large scale of things. But it was always fun for him to see the story of our planet and its soils, and how you can see that storytelling with this material that's right in front of us. But what we're hope to accomplish here is the function of soil with grape growing, and really how it influences wine styles. So its relation to soil types. How will we see that in the way that the final wine drinks? We'll break down the major soil types. We'll look at textures from there, and then a little bit about nutrients towards the end. What does nitrogen, what does magnesium, what do these contribute in the vine's development? And through this process, highlighting the related wine regions when perhaps bringing up a specific soil type or even texture, where would we usually find that? On the right-hand side, also from the Loire Valley, but if you go and visit them, and you might have seen this with other wineries, this is Bernard Baudry, also of the Loire Valley, just a little bit further east than where our first slide came from, but northern France. And this is a gentleman that, again, bottles by cuvee according to soil type, again, position on the hill. And Lagrange, this is an area closest to the water. So like a sandier alluvial soil based out of Chinon. I'm sure there's probably a few Chinon fans in here. Area based off of Cabernet Franc primarily, and then you can also do Chenin Blanc. But sandier alluvial soils closer by the water, producing the freshest style. And as we get to the lower parts of the slopes, here we have gravel. This is his Le Grézu bottling, where you start to see a little bit more structure. And then as we climb further up the slope away from the water, we get into this yellow limestone. This is Le Clos Guillot, where you get a lot of precision and a lot of brightness. And if I say minerality, I might just be talking about acidity, but you get a lot of preserved acidity and a lot of texture for perhaps ageability. And at the very, very top of the slope, we move from this yellow limestone into a white limestone. And then here he'll actually release a Cabernet Franc and a Chenin Blanc growing on these higher slopes. La Croix Boissé is the name of these two bottlings, the most precise and also the most structured with this limestone base. And then once we climb over the top of the hillside, we have his Domaine bottling, where again, it gets into this softer type of soil, just producing a fresher example, not too far off from the lower lying parts near the water. And I thought it was just kind of a fun fact before we get into the next few slides. A small patch of soil, if you just look at 1 square yard, like 9 feet, 3 meters by 3 meters, within that, the soil will hold billions of living things such as insects, spiders, worms, fungi, and bacteria. So just the life, it's like a whole universe with even just a small patch of soils to remind ourselves about, we're talking about organic material or matter, what actually exists. So here, just a general overview of the soils, some of these foundations and its main influences. It's always kind of well known, and they've discovered this through trial and error of years of viticulture, that the vine should always struggle. We always want well-drained, penetrable soils with good water retention. Essentially, we want the vines always to grow deep in search of water. They like that struggle, but whenever it gets to be too difficult, we do need certain water levels for the vine to sustain itself. So it's good to have penetrable soils with good water drainage, but enough water supply to provide the vines when needed. But it's always that search for water and minerals. And that's the purpose of soil. It's to provide, it's the source for water and it's the source for nutrients. And usually with this struggle idea, if a soil is ever too fertile, which is usually better for more agriculture. You know, you want your fruits or vegetables to ripen well, so you have lots of sugars or just lots of flavors. But here, if there was too much water, well, it can actually start to damage the vine, but it might ripen too quickly, where the fruit that you get becomes a little bit thin. And you might even get more vegetative growth, where there's then more focus on the canopies and the leaves above, and that's taken away from the actual ripeness of the grapes itself, which is what you want. So you always want a little bit of struggle. They always say the vines, they don't like the feet to get wet, but if there's ever too much water, well, eventually the vine could shut down. But if anything else, you want a slower ripening process, where you can get sugars with preserved acidity. And if you don't have it, the grape, it produces wines that are kind of flabby and a little bit thin. Structure. There's importance in nutrients, but a lot of it is the structure of the soils, the way that the soils are formed. A lot of it, and that's what allows for water drainability or its retention. But and then heat retaining and reflecting character, and that's in correlation with climate. One of the strongest examples I'm sure you've known is the slate soils of Mosel, where in some of the highest reaches for growing grapes, in areas that would almost be too difficult, but you have these wonderful slate soils that absorb the heat from the day and are able to reflect that on the grapes to help ripen the fruit, where otherwise might be too difficult. You can even think of other examples. Perhaps there's warm afternoons and then very cold nights where there's that strong diurnal shift. I think of like even these like pudding stones, those softball stones of Châteauneuf-des-Papes, where you even have these strong moistral winds that can blow over the area, creating a rather cool environment. But when you're near the Mediterranean, you have these large pudding stones that can absorb that heat and help supply that to the vines as they're ripening, the grapes as they're ripening. So water drainage, struggle, heat retaining aspects. And then this is also hugely important, high soil pH, common in limestone rich soils, contributes to higher acidity, low pH in the grapes. And that's always that brightness, that crispness, that refreshing quality. It's even like a tension, but it's usually what has you kind of going after the other sip, is that retained acidity. And where can you find it? This is in soil levels where there's high pH. So high pH in the soil lends to low pH in the wine, and that's inversely related. So you always have higher acidity in the wine from high soils with high pH, which is typically inhospitable to most agriculture. But again, viticulture, this is where it thrives. And just as where lower acidity, low pH can be a deterrent to viticulture, but can be countered by the application of lime. So there are ways to treat these things. If you were in a difficult situation, I suppose you could apply lime to your soils if you happen to be running a low pH. And when we're looking into nutrients, nitrogen availability and the mineral balance is key to healthy soils, but this is the main nutrient needed for grape growing. Second to that would be like potassium and magnesium, calcium, just a couple of the major ones that help in development. And what we're looking at here is CEC, like nitrogen, it helps for just even, I said grapes development. If you ever even to the point when you get into, I was going to say, once you get into even an oversupply of it, it might just encourage vegetative growth again, which would take away from berry development, which is not what you want. So it's always that fine balance, but you need enough because it helps even allows the shoots to grow and just, again, roots to develop. So it's an important part of just its overall growth, but it can be a deterrent if it's too much. As far as nitrogen, just to backtrack. And then once you even bring the grapes into the cellar, yeast, which is also natural forming, it needs enough nitrogen to follow out fermentation in a safe way. If you don't have enough nitrogen in the soils, and once you start to ferment, the yeast might struggle, so it might not be able to ferment properly. So it plays a role in both the winemaking and also just how the grape can grow. CEC, so this very last one is cation exchange capacity. So it's the vine in the soil's ability to exchange these nutrients. So what nutrients are found within the soils, and then the vine's ability to intake these nutrients needed for proper growth. What sticks out in my head is clay. It's a negatively charged soil. And because it's negatively charged, it's able to bind to a lot of these positive ions, essentially these positively charged nutrients. So clay, being a negatively charged soil, it has a high level of these nutrients because it's able to bind on to these positive elements, these positive ions. And then, so the soil, the vine, is always able to find plenty of these nutrients, these positive ions that are bound to these negatively charged clay soils. So there's always plenty of nutrients available, usually in clay soils, and that's just how these are charged. And there's a strong cation exchange capacity available. So you're just kind of like, well, this maybe soil has a higher level of calcium or a higher level of magnesium, and then what's the vine's ability to actually absorb those nutrients for proper development? It's the exchange. Hopefully these things make sense. Most wines are grown on sedimentary soils, which we'll look at here in a moment, since they are well suited to agriculture, but not all. But where we find most soil grapes being grown. Just a little bit of a look at grapevine requirements. You need about 13 hours of sunshine. It kind of puts us in that latitude of 30 to 50 degrees. As far as where you're growing these grapes, and then the rainfall that's generally required 10 to 30 inches annually. And then this is just a look at our soils, our layers of soils. As soils formed, the different structural and textural types will form layers, which can be investigated by digging a soil profile. This is just how you would be able to view that, kind of a little side departure. You might have seen this while touring a vineyard. Perhaps they had a quarry or something where they actually dug out, were mining some of these rocks, where you might be able to see kind of a cut into the hillside, so you can see these depths of layers, if it'd be like the topsoil or the subsoil, or you can actually sometimes see how far the roots are able to grow and develop, and what might separate these different layers. They might even just do it out of just a soil study look. But I've come across it from times. It's kind of similar to what we almost saw on a small scale with the Bernard Baudry and how he organized those soils in those glass cases. But a soil profile reveals these layers. If there are any drainage or root barriers in the soil, which will prevent its exploration by plant roots. So if you end up getting to this hard rock that doesn't have any sort of porous elements to it, that would prohibit the vines to actually dig deep, what would inhibit that? Soil aeration, huge thing here. Provides oxygen to aerobic organisms and suppresses the growth of harmful anaerobic ones. I'm just going to read through it. Provides roots with essential oxygen for respiration and growth. This one I'm not as keen on, but removes carbon dioxide and other waste gases formed by the breakdown of organic matter and by plant roots. So soil aeration, I think this is a huge thing that kept coming up to me. You can't be working with compact soils. Soils, they become porous. You need space between the particles for any type of rock. And those space between those particles, that's what allows for aeration, and it also allows for the water flow. Aeration is important for the exchange of oxygen and even water flow. And what is the point of soils? It's the vine's ability to obtain water and nutrients. And it also allows the grape, they call it aggregate, this formation of these holes in the particles of the actual rocks themselves. It's called aggregate. It's how they're formed together. Well, if you don't have the strong aggregate, essentially these like porous holes, the space between particles, and the vine the soil's at risk of becoming compact. So there's no space between these particles, and then there's no air exchange, and then there's no water exchange. And the vine's roots might not even be able to grow or penetrate these soils. So then there's little to no ability of the absorption of water, which is necessary, and there's little to no possibility of the absorption of just air, and which is organic material. Anaerobic organism. That's why I had a little hesitant on that one. Harmful anaerobic ones. Let me think about that, Jeff. I'm looking at chat. He was asking an example of first bullet. Yeah, suppresses the growth of anaerobic ones. If it would be, let me think about that one real quick. Okay. That's why I had a kind of a pause on that. For me, what's important is that it's just that exchange of oxygen, or that exchange of airflow, and that exchange of water flow through soil aeration. And a lot of that is promoted also due to microbial life, which is a result of organic matter. And how you can promote that is, well, you can do no tilling, which allows that microbial life to develop, which keeps that strong aggregate formation. And then you can also do like cover crops, and you can also do like steady regular compost to promote this microbial life that gives you this strong soil aeration, which gives you these fundamentals of water and air exchange. That's where I'm seeing a stronger benefit, where I get a little more tripped up on the anaerobic organisms. So I'll have to come back to that. Or if anybody else has a good example, throw it out there. As we look further into these soils, this is kind of how they break it down. Like here, they call them horizons too. The total of all horizons is essentially your soils. But on the very, very top, our organic layer, our humus. What do we find up here? Just decomposing leaves. This can be a thin or thick layer, but sometimes not even present at all. Once we get above the humus, we do have our topsoil. And then this is mostly minerals from the parent material below, all mixed with organic matter that's incorporated. But it's good material for plants and other organisms to live. So this is where you'd have a lot of maybe organic matter, which could just be like bacteria or fungi, or even a mix of like earthworms, where you would find all of these. And that's what's promoting a strong aggregate, that little space between particles, and also encouraging a higher level of micronutrients that can be supplied to the vine. And within the topsoil, this is where you're going to find most of the root system and most of the feeding network. And then once you get underneath the topsoil, here we have our subsoil, also rich in minerals that leached or moved down from the A horizon or topsoil and accumulated below. And then the structure of the subsoil, which is what influences drainage and allows for the roots to grow deep, and also a stronger ability to collect minerals. Like once you even have these strong roots that are growing really deep, if you ever have any like drought or difficulties in with the vintage, again, maybe low, maybe at again like drought, you have these strong roots that are able to, that are so far deep that they're able to source not only nutrients, but water from far below. And that's what you usually find with old vines. So it's stronger durability during even difficult times with these deep roots. Parent material just right above the bedrock, the deposited earth surface from which the soil developed. So the rest of the soil just kind of formed from this parent material, hence where it gets its name. And then the bedrock far, far below, sometimes people say it's not even a soil, but just a massive rock, such as granite, basalt, quartzite, limestone, sandstone, that will form this parent material right above, if it's actually close enough to the earth's surface. So sometimes, you might find a very shallow topsoil. I think of like steeped hillsides. So like on the, like even in Burgundy, once you get further up slope, through erosion, it loses a lot of that topsoil. So you're much, much closer to the subsoil where a lot of those mineral and nutrients are located. And once you get further down slope, the topsoil, again, through erosion, everything kind of falling down, collecting at the bottom, you'll have a higher topsoil, usually producing a softer style of wine. When you're up further on the hillside with where all that erosion has taken place with a shallower topsoil, and you're closer to the subsoil, or even a little bit closer to the bedrock, you usually find wines that are a little more chiseled with a little bit higher precision, kind of precision. Yeah, that's what I said. So here, as we're cruising along, I hope, I take my time with this stuff, I realize. We have our three major categories of soil types and just how they're formed. It's kind of funny where a lot of this stuff, even in review, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like third grade material, but I have to back myself up always to these basics. Essentially, there's igneous, there's sedimentary, and metamorphic. So igneous means of fire generated by volcanic activity. So we can look at a couple different maps. I like this one far below with our rock types. Sedimentary, we're going to dive deep into a little more with each of these, but essentially formed from volcanic activity, either inside or outside of the Earth's crust. Second in line is sedimentary, which is, again, the most common soil type that we find, especially with grape growing, formed by the movement of water. So here we can see it placed down by the water. Essentially, everything was derived from igneous rock, the original soil type, and then perhaps worn down by weather over time, broken down and reformed transported with water. It will eventually become sedimentary. And then the very last one, igneous sedimentary, is metamorphic. And metamorphic is either igneous, like volcanic, or sedimentary, formed by mostly water movement. That these soils, igneous or sedimentary, have been flattened and compressed and then cooked underneath the Earth's surface. Essentially, like the soils have been baked. That forms our final soil type. So it can be either or, sedimentary or igneous, and then just formed by heat and pressure under Earth's surface. So another way of looking at, like, oh, lava erupts or even magma down below. Well, this is what creates our igneous rock. And then through that time and breakdown, we eventually will get to sedimentary with the transport of water, and then metamorphic, compressed by heat, baked under the Earth's surface. So when we dig into igneous, we do have our extrusive or intrusive, like we just said, outside or inside, made from the cooling and solidification of magma inside, or lava outside of the Earth's crust. One of them is volcanic soil, which is basalt. Here's a picture of this down below. So basalt is an extrusive, where it's formed by lava on the outside of the surface. The cooling time is seconds to months, so it cools very fast, being outside of the Earth's surface. Hardened and weathered lava. Here it's finely grained, drains well, retains and reflects heat, and holds water. So it provides heat to the vine and also holds certain water capacity. High proportions of iron and magnesium. This is good for chlorophyll, which keeps the leaves green, which is important for photosynthesis. If you ever have like iron or magnesium deficiency, magnesium is the only ion that provides chlorophyll to the vine. So without it, you would suffer from chlorosis. And you'll see that like high limestone contact, which you come across in Burgundy. When you ever have high limestone content, it inhibits the vine's ability to absorb iron. And with maybe with that iron deficiency, will eventually lead to chlorosis, which is the leaves turning yellow. And that inhibits or prohibits the vine's ability to photosynthesize, just absorbing sunlight and water and turning it into sugars in the first place. So here we don't have to worry about that. Our chlorophyll is safe, thanks to basalt. Once the general flavor profile, this is where I kind of take a slight departure, but what people associate with it is that they have this ashy, smoky kind of flavor and taste profile. Well, it's coming from volcanic ash. Hey, real quick, when we talk about minerality in soils, I can taste the seashell. I can taste the chalk. I can taste the cold clay, or I can taste the warm gravel. It's pretty clear to us that there's nothing that's been correlated as far as like an actual flavor profile, any sort of or aromatic compound from that wine that can be directly linked to the soil. So we might have things or aspects of the wine that remind us of these things, but there's never anything directly linked. What the soil provides is these nutrients, which does, and again, it's the formation of the soil, which then the vine depends on just water retention and then how it can grow its roots. But so the nutrients and other factors can help perhaps affect like not only root development, but also maybe cell skin, like the skin to the grape, like cell development is what I was going to say. So there are aspects that are affected by the soil types, but nothing is directly related to actually flavor profiles. And when we're talking about minerality, seashell, chalk, we're talking about acidity in the wines. These are descriptors that you usually find in areas of like Chablis, or you might even find with this Muscadet. But it's that acidity in these limestone soils, high pH, that presents itself in a very drying way. It's a drying sensation that reminds us of something like licking a seashell, or like something like chalkboard erasers were just clapped in front of you. So it's not like I can taste that seashell in which it's grown. I can't necessarily taste that clay, but those soils lend qualities in the way that that grape can grow, which will certainly affect its structures and eventually aromatics, but it's not directly linked. Hopefully that makes sense. Now that's said with I want to make sure that's stated. Sometimes though, people still identify, like I bring up this, a friend of ours he was really good at blind tasting, and for some reason he was actually able to, like, gosh, this reminds me of a volcanic. This wine must have been from grapes grown on volcanic soils. Like, what makes you think of that? And he's like, well, it's kind of ashy and smoky. Well, there's no scientific correlation to that, but he was able to be relatively consistent with that. So we can take our sciences set aside and seeing what people have come across through just experience, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think of more of it like, how does it lend to acidity? How does it lend to body? How does it lead to tannin? Again, like the skin's development. Absolutely. And where do wine's flavors come from? Why is it really expressive? Maybe the skins were, the berries were smaller in size, producing thicker skins. So you have stronger aromatics and even stronger tannins. Well, that makes sense, but it's not like, oh my gosh, I can link this to the granite that it's grown on. Not necessarily. We find this usually in Sicily and the Canary Islands. Interesting. Here, I'm gonna go to the next slide, because I'm being so slow. Another type of igneous rock, besides our just basalt, extrusive granite is formed underneath the Earth's surface as intrusive, where it's, instead of being cooling down rather quickly that we saw with basalt, here it has a slower process of cooling. Cooling magma is mixed with quartz, just the specific granite on the other side, or coarse grain versus fine grain in this particular picture. Granite, you can find it in a range of soils and textures throughout the world. That's true with many of these. They're oftentimes interwoven. Elevated pH in the soil reduces wine's acidity. This is said backwards. Elevated pH in soil reduces higher acidity in the wines. So it's a weird, ignore that one statement here. It might even, anyway, just ignore that because that contradicts what's actually taking place. Porous enough to allow for deep-rooted vines, producing layered subtle aromas and flavors that can develop in years. It's just sometimes with you have these deep-rooted vines, there are maybe subtleties and complexities that you can find in older vines with deep roots than perhaps a younger vine with shallower roots, is where that's going. And I was just looking at this, like as you move into like granite from even basalt, increasing silica content. And I was like, well, what does silica actually provide? Well, silica, and we can remember this because we'll review it in a second. Silica enhances the strength and rigidity of plants. So stronger durability maybe, which reduces pest attacks while increasing the light receiving posture of the plant. So it strengthens the plant. So if there's ever an influence of, if there's ever concern about pest attacks, well, it's kind of more resilient. And then it also is able to stand stronger, increasing the light receiving posture of the plant. Silica, as we move higher up into granite, allowing the plant to photosynthesize for further growth. Where do we usually find this is in Cornas, Rias Baixas, and then also Beaujolais. Anyway, so yeah, the basalt, intrusive, granite, extrusive, and then granite, extrusive, slower cooling period. We want to find higher silica, which provides root strength. Now, soil, when we move into sedimentary, comprise of solidified mineral or organic deposits from the earth, often left by bodies of water. A few random examples. This is kind of interesting, like we're talking about its influence of wine, but it's kind of interesting when you start looking at maybe the structure of these rocks and then how they might be applied to other parts of the world. like sandstone used for construction of buildings and statues and temples. It's pretty solid rock. Limestone used for the manufacturing of writing chalk and concrete and glass. Anyway, just side little departure here. But limestone, the name of the game here, finest wine producing soil in the world, found in many famous regions. So this would be like your Burgundy and Champagne. This famous geology consultant Pedro Parra of Chile, who has studied in Burgundy, he would oftentimes say the key to top wines is high limestone content, and that is the high pH in the soils that lends to higher acidity in the wine, and that's what creates the tension that you want for a refreshing wine in the first place. Limestone. Formed by the decomposed bodies of mollusks, fish, and other organic material that once lived in ancient seabeds and reefs. So everything formed by essentially matter that was once underwater. Limestone chalk, type of limestone, chalk. What are some of its benefits? That it drains well, but also holds on to enough water for the vines to absorb when needed. So well drained, and then generally long, high pH, generally long-lived, and have bright linear acidity. You also find some of this in Jerez. Whatever gives a wine ageability is acidity. It's like Riesling is one of the most age-worthy wines. And why is because it has natural high acidity, not necessarily due to limestone soils up there. That's more an influence of climate in a rather cool area. But white Burgundy or even Champagne, why you can maybe drink Champagne as far back as the 40s sometimes, although it might be a different wine. What allows for that is that acidity. Where is some of that coming from? These limestone soils from these fossilized remains once underneath water. That whole area up in northern France was once the Paris Basin. Other types of sedimentary soils formed by the movement of water. We have sandstone, one example. Sand-sized particles that have been compacted together over time and pressure, various colors depending on the type of rock it's made of, commonly containing quartz. Crystalline form of silica, again, silica, that's what provided the strength and the structure, which was helped resistant against pest, and again, which helped even in its, to stand up in its position with the sunlight, and that was explained in the previous slide, right, which helped in the its ability to photosynthesize, which is one of its main purposes. Quartz, silica, sandstone. And where do you find quartz typically, or from the sandstone soil? Chianti Classico, sometimes on the top parts of the hillside, they'll call it Albarese. And then our last example of sedimentary soil, silex and flint. Here, we can find this up again in northern France, not too far away from like Champagne or even Burgundy, of like Sancerre and Puy-Fumé, more specifically Puy-Fumé, but it's one of them 3 major soil types of Sancerre. This is a harder soil, they say metal-like, contains a high proportion of flint made from silicon dioxide, but one of the main benefits here too is its ability to store and reflect heat, providing ripeness in sometimes rather cool areas further north. And some of the profiles that are described in the way that wine drinks, again, I say this quietly, it's kind of like ashiness or smokiness from volcanic soils. They sometimes say like a flintiness, like Capgun flint, as if you just struck these silex soils next to each other. The Sauvignon Blanc from Puy-Fumé can be rather flinty or can be rather smoky. And we're moving on to our last metamorphic, and then we're going to break down structures real quick. Soils that have been transformed again from one type of rock through heat and pressure over millions of years. So here we have slate and we have schist. Some of our 2 examples here on the left. They're closely related to schist, but is less compressed. So it's like a softer type of soil. Formed by alluvial deposits underneath heat and pressure, hence metamorphic. But dark and variable in color, slate is easily broken, but not as subject to weathering as other soils. So you can still penetrate, the vine can still penetrate its roots through this slate. Absorbs and reflects heat, and where do we see that most commonly is in Mosel. So it's absorption of heat and still allowing the grapes to kind of move its way through these slightly softer soils. Schist is a harder soil, crystalline rock more dense than slate. So both of these metamorphic, slate softer, this is harder, more dense. And where can we find this? Also retaining heat, producing these bigger, more powerful wines. Douro Valley, where you have your wonderful ports and even like dry styles of reds based off Touriga National, always giving you a little bit of richness and weight. And then you can also find this up in Ribera Sacra. And then here I like this. So remember metamorphic, it's formed by either igneous or sedimentary. Well, slate, which we find in Germany, is usually coming from the sedimentary shale. And then under heat and pressure, this is what's formed. Gneiss, which is one of our wines, which is based off of, it comes from igneous rocks, which we have down below. Just another reminder of how these wines, these soils are formed. And then gneiss, very hard and fertile soil, great for grape growing, formed either volcanic, from either volcanic granite or schist. Granite or schist, heat and pressure, it's gonna make gneiss. It looks similar to granite. Minerals are arranged in bands that run through the rock. It's kind of pretty. And then where do we find this is mostly in Wachau and Kamptal area. Producing richer styles. So once even in like Kamptal or Wachau, once you move further up the slope away from this metamorphic gneiss, it's also like a windswept soil. That's when you start getting into where the more primary rock, less topsoil, that's where Riesling will do a little bit better. And then I'll move past this, but it's another way of kind of reviewing what we just saw, like all these pictures. So now we know that there's igneous, there's sedimentary, and there's metamorphic, and within that different types of rocks. And now we're breaking down our soil structures. So I like the way that this is formed. Many wine soils are defined by their textures, which are comprised of igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And I think this is what was always confusing, because any of these soil types are actually just broken down. And it's just like, how are they physically formed? So we have sand, there's clay, there's gravel, silt, loess, loam, and alluvium. So any type of these soils, we're just looking at the formation of them. Is it a small particle? Is it a large rock? What and how are they formed? So sand, any rock that has been pulverized into small particles feels rough and gritty, like when you run it through the fingers. And then because of this, it drains relatively easily. And why it works well in wet climates, because you don't have waterlogged soils because it's well drained. But if you perhaps are in a really dry area, it could be problematic because it's so well drained that you might actually run into issues of drought. So how it can benefit one place versus another when you're actually growing grapes. A lot of these grapes grown on sandier soils, it's been kind of great because sometimes they're able to work with older vines because they've never been affected by phylloxera. Most of us have been to these wine classes before, that root loss that devastated the world's vines, but they're not able to survive very well on sandy soils. And I've always learned that's due to its texture. So a lot of times sandier soils, you can find some old, even ungrafted vines. And the general profile, and this I've seen, is that it's usually a little bit lighter and it's a little bit delicate, the wines produced from sandier soils. Famous producer Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Chateau Rayes, based off 100% Grenache. It is absolutely wild to see how light and pretty and elegant those wines are, because it's Grenache grown on sandy soils versus sometimes your very meaty, dark, textured Grenache blends from other parts of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And that is just a difference in soil. And people are such huge fans of that Grenache on sandy soils made by Rayes that that's an emphasis for them in other parts of the world. Like there's a grower in Australia that also is continuing to grow Grenache on sandy soils because he's trying to follow in that same pursuit. He just loves that elegance that you see from these particular soil types. Areas of Barolo where you'll also find it even more on the eastern parts of Serralunga de Alba and Monforte de Alba. Here, it's just versus the limestone that you'll see on the other sides, it just provides wines with a little bit more ageability. I like how they break this down into particle size on this particular thing. So you see the smallest, and it goes to bigger. You think of sand as always like fine grain, but the actual particle is one of the larger when you compare it to actually silt or clay, clay being the smallest of all three of these examples. Yeah, it's usually a little bit paler from sandier soils. It's usually a little bit lighter. And I don't know how that works with when I say cell development, I'm talking about the skins of the grape. How it reflects in that. I'd have to like kind of dig a little bit deeper on. But yeah, sandier soils are usually a little bit, produce wines that are a little bit lighter and a little bit prettier. You notice it in color. Anyway, clay. So this is again our one of our smallest in particle size. Again, kind of just back and forth to remind ourselves how this can look. Topsoil of clay can expand and contract with water. There are actually different types of clay that can might expand or contract more with either heavy rainfall or even dry spouts. But deep clay subsoil retains precipitation and minerals, which if in a drier area can be a savior to the vines in difficult times. Rich in plant food for better growth. That's kind of, again, where they're rich in nutrients, and how that made sense to me when I was reading about it's negatively charged and how it can bind to these positive ions. So it's really rich in these like potassium and magnesium and iron, these nutrients that are readily available for this cation exchange that takes place between the vines and the soils. And I think this is kind of like volcanic, they say ashy. Sometimes you see this, and I think that has a little bit to do with this availability of nutrients, is that the wine from clay, well, sometimes they say that the texture is very similar to like what you'd imagine clay to be like, where it's like round and it's concentrated and it's kind of soft and it's almost like thick, you know, like there's some weight and voluptuousness to it. A lot of these wines that come from clay soils, one of the strongest examples of that is in Palmerol, of like, you know, this major producer Petrus. They did this amazing, okay, so the other side, so clay soil is usually on the right bank, softer, rounder, fuller styles, usually retains a little bit, better retains water, which, and then is also slightly cooler, versus gravel, which is better at the vine, the roots, the drainage of water. There's a higher drainage of water, less water retention in gravel soils on the left bank side of Bordeaux in the Medoc, which is good for Cabernet because it needs to dig deep in search of those nutrients. That doesn't do as well with water heavier soil types. And what's even better is that the gravel soils, they warm up a little bit faster, helping that Cabernet, which needs a little bit extra heat and time to ripen. It allows that to ripen successfully. So gravel soils on the left bank, less water retention, allows for the roots to grow deep, and it also reflects some of that warm heat, which is good for Cabernet Sauvignon. And then the clay on the eastern part, if I'm just looking at Bordeaux, the two major soil types of this area, cooler, heavier nutrients, and then retains more water. They did this wonderful study in Bordeaux that looked at like so many different vintages next to each other, and they couldn't tie anything that related to a quality vintage with specific nutrients of any soils. And it wasn't even related to sunlight that allowed for consistency. Like, oh, 2005 or 2002 was a really good year. Well, they actually had added extra sunshine that year that allowed for ripeness. They didn't find that direct correlation. What they did find was periods of drought, low rainfall was oftentimes represented by a higher quality year. So is that drought where the vine had to struggle, had to dig deep for water, what produced fruit, which eventually led to a higher quality vintage. So it wasn't nutrients, it wasn't sunshine, is actually the lower availability of water due to drought or less rainfall that was more in sync vintage to high quality vintages, if that makes sense. I hope I said that okay. So it was drought issues, not to an extreme, but low rainfall during the years that was led to the most consistent correlation between a top quality year versus other aspects. Other soil structures are silt and are loam. I hope you guys are doing okay. More finely textured than even sand, smooth to the touch are silt, or clay can be really dry or else really sticky when it's wet. Like it's dry and soft when it's dry, but it's sticky when it's wet. Silt is a little bit smooth and fine to the touch. Retains more water, which is maybe a bad thing because it can lead to actually waterlogged soils and can produce highly vigorous wines. So again, what do we get with too much water supply is too much vegetative growth, and that produces thinner, weaker berries, which isn't what we want. An example of silt is loess, a wind-blown soil silt comprised mainly of silica. This is what we also find in areas of Austria where Gruner Veltliner is mostly grown. In Lower Austria, these windswept soils, silt, thinner. Water retains water, but can be a bad thing. Loam, warm, soft, crumbly mix of sand, silt, and clay, so kind of a mix of all three. High productivity, not typically associated with quality wine making because it could be too vigorous, right? We need a vine to struggle, but when blended with other soils in right amounts can make wonderful styles. And then examples of this where you can typically find loam in the right balance with other soil types, maybe others that are less vigorous. Barossa Valley is the one that we have in front of us. And the last one here, just as far as our soil structures, just how coarsely grained it is, I guess, small, large, smooth, rocky, is alluvial, right? And this is a blend of soils, again, clay, silt, even sand, and then gravel. And then this is a combination, this combination of all these soil types is what's called alluvium. And then similar to almost like sedimentary, it's something that was deposited over many years by running water. It's like what you'd see in the valley floors or near a position of water, really, this alluvial or alluvium. Typically contains a lot of organic material, which is good, making it quite fertile, but is present in many of the world's wines regions. So again, usually we don't like super fertile soils, but when you are in the valley floor, such as these areas of Napa, Rutherford, and Newfield, one nearby proximity of water is when you come across these mix of different soil types. And then these are the nutrients that you will see. So nitrogen, second only to water importance in plant growth, major constituent of plant cell proteins. Okay. Nucleic acids, providing acids, and chlorophyll, which keeps your leaves green, allowing for photosynthesis and hormones. Vigorous shoot growth, which can shade the fruit and inhibit ripening. So this is where I was talking about an oversupply, even though it's such a necessary part of grapes development. If you get to have too much, you're just worried about too much canopy and not the berry development needed. Phosphorus, a key element in energy fixation. This is what strikes out to me a little bit more, is that it encourages berry ripening and even root growth. Potassium, interesting that it regulates the flow of water and even sugar in the plant. So if not enough potassium, perhaps that vine was really struggling and needed water. Potassium would help ensure that intake. Calcium, kind of switch that around in how I said it, but calcium regulates cell acidity and then important for this development of cell walls. Again, it's all just in grape development, really, right? And then where do, again, all of our flavors come from is the skins of the fruit and then structural elements, right? Sulfur, constituent of some amino acids and enzymes. Magnesium, this is important because of the essential component of chlorophyll. And then regulates sugar metabolism as well as acidity and encourages ripening. And then other elements, but usually in small amounts. And then I hope you guys are okay. I hope some of this, again, yeah, do a blind tasting. Thanks, Jeff. This is just a little look at kind of how this land of wine is put together. And I kind of just thought it might be kind of fun to take ourselves back in time. And if we looked at France, the age of these major soil types, Savennier and Anjou up in northern Loire, well, formed 500 million years ago. I was almost going to find an animation of the platonic tectonic plates and how they are formed and moved along, and how areas were underneath water formed by an ice stage and then erupted and then was underneath water again. So you could see that you can come across that in certain YouTube videos, but it's a little bit long for that animation to walk through 500 million years of history. But I thought it might be an interesting and a little side departure when we get to the end here. Beaujolais, also really old, next to Savennier, where it's about 350 to 300 million years ago, and that's just in the northern part where Granite is from, our volcanic soils. Underneath that, not too far away, it's already moves along close to 200 million years, where we get into slightly more limestone down below, which brings us into our Jurassic period, which you'll see continuation of like Puy-Foussé, and then even in Corton, which is Burgundy, and Sancerre, again, where we also came across silex. Moving into a slightly more recent time, Central Loire, with, you could even say areas not too far away from Savennier that goes back about 90 million years. And then the Miocene period where we find a little bit more sandstone in Châteauneuf-des-Pape. And then lastly, you guys, maybe I'll just stop my share, but we'll, or I'll exit. Where we can look at this. So Granite, again, is our volcanic in origin, not too far away from where our Savennier is based out of, right? And then our Orthogneiss is just a metamorphic style of volcanic origin down below. I should talk about, I mean, this is just a good producer to be aware of at first. Why he has this influence is because this early adoption of organic viticulture, certified organic, for over 40 years, biodynamic for 20 years, and then the strong, unique identification of terroir. And when people were just blending in, Muscadet was just simply known as like a $10, $15 like oyster wine for a hot day. Here's someone really kind of emphasizing the specifics of soil types and how they can show differently in the wines and how they drink. And then a little bit of longer extended aging with the leftover yeast, which is another way of building texture, 15 to 18 months. So another movement towards quality. And then both of these wines, the Granite and Orthogneiss, are based off of 45 to 50-year-old vines. Similar aspects, looking at the distributor's site where it's southwest facing. I mean, these grapes are hand harvested, wild yeast fermentation, so there's no influence as far as like, I don't want to say cultured yeast, but commercial yeast, because yeast can a lot of flavor, so not influence there. And then both spending the same aging process, just being underground in concrete vats. I hope you guys are doing okay. Hopefully we did try to take some of these things, and try to simplify them a little bit, or at least make sense out of them, and not just say metamorphic or igneous. Hopefully there was some understanding that came along with kind of our studies over the last hour. You guys, there's a couple of you guys drinking these wines. Do you find them to be different? Yeah. Maybe, do you just have a preference of one over the other? Oh, here, I don't think I have you. A lot of you guys are on. Unmute all, unmute themselves. I think you guys just have to unmute yourselves if you want to talk. There we go, Kaya.
Well, we went 50-50. I prefer the granite and Katrina prefers the non-granite.
Yeah.
Have you ever had these wines before? Domaine de Lecu? No? Yeah, we thought that would be fun. Like, just let's try to limit any other influence and just really focus on these two soils and how they show. You know, they talk about the granite being more mineral. To me, again, it's more chiseled, more precise. I thought this had like a softer fruit quality to it. I thought it was a little bit prettier. The Orthogneiss, they say, is usually a little more structured, has a little more weight to it. I found this one to be kind of savior, a little more savory. Like, it took me on the route of, like, I don't want to go as far as like saying mushroomy or like flinty or smoky or anything like that, but it seemed to bring like a slightly more rustic, savory edge to it, where I thought the granite was a little bit prettier and a little bit more floral.
The other one was, my first description was just like, it was just a bigger mouthfeel, almost sweet but not sweet. That, like, you know.
What I found amazing was how much they changed. The temperature, as the temperature warmed up, the wines really changed from when we first had them, right out of the fridge to now. Very different.
For what we're doing, I think it's almost nice to even have them at closer room temperature, you know, where you're like, whoa, like these, not something you'd probably always want to drink all the time, but well, cool. I thank you so much for even your interest in these wines. I think it's kind of just like, again, scratching the surface from what other producers are doing and what most cuvées all over the world can be based off of. Again, if it's not just like elevation of the vineyard site or aspects, it's oftentimes just these differences of soils. But here, this guy is really like honing in on that and trying to say, check this out. Look how different these wines can show.
Do you find this to be different than other Muscadet from the same area?
You know, there's a lot of great Muscadet producers out right now that are making wines that are textured and a little richer. I would say this still, like, I wouldn't feel like if someone ordered a Muscadet, I wouldn't feel like I'd have to warn them about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is going to take you in a totally different direction. Because I still think it's light and pretty and easy and dry. And when I'm saying mineral, again, I'm just talking about that tartness and that brightness. But I think these still add a little more texture and a little more concentration than what I would usually find. There's more substance to these than what I would maybe associate with other Muscadets that you could probably just casually come across. If I'm not talking about some of these other big hitters like Pepier or they're on a different wavelength. They're focusing on something new. Well, you have them there too, Mike. Did you find them? I don't mean to keep everybody.
No, that Ortho is fuller for sure, and at least for me, it's got more mouthfeel. It's heavy on the tongue. Body is richer, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it can't be from longer lees aging or anything else. Like, there's no other thing that's manipulated.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is fun, right? Like,
yeah.
Gosh, it makes me wish we could do these in person, because like I just ran through all of these things, but it'd be nice to taste more of these things by example. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe we would find our.
Fine, it's okay.
What's that? Well, you know, like, just it comes to life in a real way through example. It's not just a note on a slide or talking about exchange of nutrients or water capacity or water retention or, you know, things like that.
Is this something that comes in and off your menu, or is this special for this class? Do you run these through the restaurant? We like
Domaine de Lecu. We'll have, there's a couple for Muscadet producers if we might kind of play around and maybe have one that we haven't had for a while when it's time to switch out, just because we like variety and there's so many awesome stuff. We like the guy is under new ownership, but the guy's name is Guy Bossard, the farmer. But he sold the state to this new gentleman. That just escapes me at the moment, but Guy Bossard is the guy to pay attention to. And I mean, You know what's great though is I find this a lot of places. Like I wouldn't be surprised you could even find this in like a Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or something. I mean, those grocery stores are actually kind of great in their selection sometimes. But I've gone to Minnesota and gone to like South Carolina, and you'll see Domaine de la Cour at quite a few places. But now it's like, I don't know. I think this is where it can just be so fun. Like even in the Loire class, and you're looking at Baudry's different cuvées, you know, based off of sand or gravel or limestone. It's like you just want to try them all, kind of, you know, or like just to learn about the wines that way. Like, oh wow, this is so unique, and where people are really championing this. And I mean, you know, that's what's too bad about Burgundy. And I mean, just like the curious wine drinker, and that's why wine's so fun, because it ties you to place. And that's where like Burgundy is all based off of these same ideas. This one's got a little more clay or a little more limestone, or this was water where there's less topsoil. It's a little bit higher, better drained at a higher elevation. But you can't even try the differences because they're so expensive. So it's like you don't even have that ability of exploration anymore. So like Loire's a good place where you can do that. But otherwise, that's where it's really fun, you know, like, oh, I like this producer. What's it like from this area? How does it differentiate from this area? It's not to like, it is that I think process of exploration and becoming involved with these producers and learning about them and their wines, you know. Okay. Thanks so much. Man, I wish we could do this all the time. You know, like if we just kept at this, like, wow, we'd really start to build an understanding, because I know I have a lot of questions still out there. I know there's always, after every class, it's like, oh, I didn't explain that very well. Or, you know, like even your own confusion still come to surface. And I hope it's not too many of those things. You know, you want to be well prepared, but it's not a total, I mean, they're still discovering more things all the time. But I thought all these books are great. I'll leave them with you too. I mean, this is again, Jamie, good. There's no BS wrapped around this. This is what's happening. This is what we've discovered. This is what we know what's going on. This is what you can expect. Kept you, well, not too much longer afterwards. Okay. Kelly, as always, great to see you. Thanks for the support. So we'll send out the outlines tomorrow, and then just thank you so much.
Thank you.
So wait, one question, what should we do next? Like you just scratched the surface, and actually I have to say most of it went right over my head. So what can I do now to just make this sink in a little bit more? Besides read these books and drink wine.
You know what? Yeah, you know, well, I didn't mind this one, because it's not like you could just pick up a region and you can learn about the influential producers, and then you can learn about their different bottlings. Like this is where I found the Baudry stuff. I think Alsace is a patchwork of soils too, where you can find like difference of soil types going from like 100 millions of years apart from each other, and just from like one Grand Cru to the next, or like 3 different hillsides. But he might introduce you to producers that focus on these things, and then you can discover their bottlings. I'm like, well, that seems interesting to me. Maybe I can try one of these wines, or maybe, and then if it's something I like, then I can maybe try another, and then see how they might differentiate from one to the next. But I think he would put you on a good path of producers to check out, and then you can see what's represented in the different cuvées. I think that's probably a good idea. You know what else? Sorry. When I brought up Racine's wine list, I think they're reopening. I shared that with the Loire one.
Yeah, you did.
Because she's like, we can't put all these bottlings on our list. Like it just would be unbalanced almost, you know, like we probably won't have both of these, you know, we'd probably choose one or the other, but now I feel like I'm missing out if I only have one, really. But she has Pascaline Lepelletier. She has like just multiple cuvées and multiple vintages of just single bottlings. So it might be interesting to see. I mean, you can learn a lot from looking at wine lists, like who people are putting, especially from respected like restaurants. So that might be kind of another fun way of looking at it. Like, oh, who does she have listed? And what do they have multiple bottlings of? And like, oh, okay, this is 5 different wines from one producer of the same year. Like there's gotta be a reason that she has them on their list.
Cool.
That might be a good way. All right. Well, there's smiles. All right.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a great weekend.
Oh gosh, you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
See you
Bye-bye.
next time.
Bye.